Savagely bitter. Love it.
This is Beer Geek Bucket List.
Once in a generation, something really special comes along. In 2015, we saw one of those generational moments when Paul Jones began selling his beers in Manchester, England.
So now Manchester is famous not just for football and Oasis, but also beer.
I'm sitting down with Paul to taste some beers, find out what it's like to live with the huge expectations he faces, and his vision for the future of Cloudwater.
Okay, let's go, I guess, back in time to early you. You know, were you always from Manchester?
No, I'm a Geordie born and bred, but you wouldn't know it from my accent. I moved to Manchester in 20 years ago, 1998, to pick up some music tech study, and I stayed here. I wasn't really the top of my list place to live, but it was certainly a very significant step up from the southwest where I grew up. Beautiful part of the United Kingdom, but I guess a little plain culturally, certainly where I was in Somerset, and certainly back in those days. So moving to Manchester was it was wonderful, you know, full of culture, full of life. It felt really vibrant back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We definitely got hit really hard by the recession, but you know, it's always had a good energy to it.
How did Cloudwater come about then?
Well, I think it came about really because I wanted to try and make a contribution, and I wanted to try and bring something fresh and new into Manchester, especially when I heard that my co-founding partner, James, was leaving Marble and then going into consulting. I'd been a big fan of his beers, and I really wanted to make sure that he stayed in the city. And so just jumped on an opportunity really to try and piece something together. We spent a year in planning, and every time we thought we'd agreed something, we set the sights a little bit higher, the production scale a little bit bigger. It felt wrong to take someone that had worked for 20 years and say, hey, do you want to scale back to where you were at 10 years ago?
Yep.
So we started off pretty much with where he was at production-wise in Marble, and set about trying to piece together, you know, what would we bring to the industry, what would we bring to the marketplace that was a little bit different, and settled on a seasonal rotating range. It was a lot of core beers around at that point in time, not so many specials or one-offs. It felt really good to bring something that was moving all the time. We did 4 3-month seasons in that first year that we were in production, and it was crazy. And, you know, we got to the end of one season, and of course you have to write a whole new batch of recipes and figure out what the hell you're going to do different to make even more drinkable beers for summer than you did for spring.
Yep.
And figure out what you're going to do with all this stock that was all of a sudden old hat because it was the last season. We all of a sudden had like fashion house problems. But it still felt, you know, even with those initial difficulties, it still felt really good. We were offering what we wanted to see into the marketplace, and you know, I think a lot of people seemed to enjoy what we did in that first year. But we really hit our stride about 9 months in, I think, and then hit the gas. Here we've got a beer that we're just about to release today, actually.
Okay.
We're known for making hazy, New England style, low bitterness IPAs. This is definitely not one of those. It's a collaboration that we did to celebrate John Paul Cassidy, a good friend of ours here at the brewery, who unfortunately passed away earlier on in the year in a tragic car accident. So we brewed a beer that he would have loved. He was a very instrumental part in getting Manchester's beer scene up and running. So we were making this beer to raise some money for Headway, a charity that supported his family while he was in hospital. And it's a collaboration with Jeff Bagby, wonderful human being from San Diego, California, who knows a thing or two about West Coast IPAs.
Yeah.
Cheers, man.
Cheers. Savagely bitter. Love it. It was West Coast IPAs that were one of the things that got me into beer a long time ago. So it's fantastic that to see these still here and still tasting as good as ever.
It's a bit of a beer for enthusiasts, you know. Like, you've really got to be into your hops to like bitter beer. I think one of the things that we found when we first switched to making lower bitterness, softer beers was they had a broader appeal. You could put those. I could put a double A. I mean, we used to run a tap room next door at the brewery 3 years ago, and I could put one of our kind of soft IPAs in front of someone that was a beer geek and someone that was a bit of a novice with beer, and they would say, I don't really like hops, and I'm like, you probably just don't like bitterness, so check this out. And it would usually go down really well for both people, but yeah, there is something deeply satisfying about rasping bitterness, that length of flavour that's on your palate with all those hops that you add in the whirlpool and back into the kettle. It's a very satisfying drink.
Let's talk a little bit about the other side of IPA, the side that you guys are probably most famous for in the UK and up there with the best in the world. Talk a little bit about the New England style or Mont style, or I guess where you've taken it, which is, I guess, equally a Manchester style IPA to be fair.
Yeah, I think we're still working on like that exact profile of a Manchester rooted ultra modern IPA. We're still chasing that dream. But our whole journey started off with AleSmith and Pizza Port and Russian River, like classics. But we were talking about how to get better flavour out of our IPAs and decided that we should start experimenting with different yeast strains to see if we could get a kind of base flavour from a yeast strain and then build on top of it with a bunch of hops. And that's a very English thing to do. I mean, most traditional beer tastes of yeast. It doesn't really taste of much else on the absolute sort of outer edges of its high impact flavour. It's yeast. So kind of inspired by some of the cask beer that we were drinking back then and some of it that we were making, and just this idea that there might be a yeast strain out there that would really give us a good base. We just set about experimenting, and before we knew it, we found a yeast strain that had a lot of stone fruit flavour. Stone fruits have like really luscious, big, rich mouthfeel to them. So we wanted to try and bring that fruity, mouth coating sensation into the beer. So we started using more high protein malts to try and replicate that.
Where does the name Cloudwater come from? And then I guess you guys are synonymous with the artwork that goes onto the cans. So talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so my wife actually found the name in a poem about wandering Buddhist monks. It's like a unsui in Japanese. I don't know how to say it in Chinese, but it really resonated with me because I knew that we were going to wander as a brewery. We were going to keep moving, keep trying to find out what modern beer means year by year. I knew that we were going to rewrite our recipes every year so that we didn't end up just producing something that was modern and kind of cutting edge 10 years ago. And then we had lots of discussions with our absolutely amazing designers at Textbook Studio, previously John, as well as Vicky and Chris, who are still with the company. But we had lots of discussions about the fact that we're going to have these rotating seasons different offerings of beer, we might as well dress them differently. And when we started trying to figure out how to go about that, I mean, a lot of my design brief to those guys was I gave them so many beer labels, and I said, nothing like that. Like, I don't want our beer to look just like something else.
Yep.
So, I mean, specifically, I wanted smaller fonts, not bigger. I wanted less text, not more. And that's, you know, we were kind of trying to solve that problem and ended up coming up with the idea of buying artwork, hiring an artist, and using their work to dress the beer. And that's something that I'm absolutely thrilled to have taken that step and that direction with our branding, because it's always fresh, but you know it, a million miles away, you know it's us. It was a little bit of a way of avoiding that rebranding exercise that breweries otherwise have to go through periodically.
Yep.
You know, it eventually doesn't quite jump off the shelf as much, and you've got to go through some lengthy study and what probably will for the next 5-10 years. I wanted to avoid that, and just rotating the artwork does a pretty good job of helping us avoid that. You know,
Yep.
we then just work on kind of minor layout changes, I guess. One less hassle to have.
And what's this?
This is our Vienna Lager. It's the first time for me to try it. So, yeah, cheers.
Cheers. So you've surprised me twice so far, in that we're now drinking a Vienna Lager after a very clean and pure West Coast IPA.
Yeah.
What's the thinking with the lager?
I start off with the context that people drink in season by season. Mm-hmm. So, you know, at this time of year, coming towards the end of festival season, starting to get into that point in time when people are getting out for like office parties and like meeting up with old friends that they've not seen all year. And I want to make sure that we've got beers that people can just talk over. We make a lot of beers that people talk about, but that's not really like the biggest value in beer from my point of view. My favorite part of beer is the way that it's social fuel. And I think especially when you make beer that people just talk over and they just get on with their lives and they catch up with their loved ones and friends, that's good beer for sure. Extend that conversation, you know, more laughs, like more ease, barriers lowered a little bit. Mm-hmm. So, you know, beers like this, what we're really hoping to do is sure give someone like a really good sensory experience.
Yep.
We want it to be delicious. We want people to find no fault in it, so they can just get on with talking to whoever they're with, or relaxing on their own, whatever they're doing, you know.
And you know, overlooking the barrels behind us.
Yep.
So you also do some sour beer and some,
Yep, we do, yeah.
I guess, non-sour barrel-aged beer?
Yeah, we do, yeah. So we've got, we started putting beer into barrels only a couple of months into brewing. We've now got, I think, a population of about 450 barrels, 3 fooders. And there's a range of beers that are being matured in spirit barrels and wine barrels, and beers that are undergoing secondary fermentation in wine barrels and primary fermentation even in wine barrels too. We've got a couple of batches of spontaneously inoculated beer that we're sat on. It's really fun for us, especially when it comes to developing our sensory analysis of beer. It's fun for us to have all the beers that we've got here in barrel, that we can blend half of this with all of that, you know, kind of piece together beers from highly successful barrels and barrels that are really just good bases. We enjoy all of these different types of beer ourselves, and we really want to be making sure that we're spreading our wings and sort of, you know, testing ourselves creatively and seeing what we can produce that satisfies, you know, a real wide range of customers.
Okay, so let's talk about this.
Yeah, it's a mess, isn't it? Took us a long time to gain acceptance for making this sort of beer. Got accused of abandoning all good brewing science in the early days. We only ever packed beer when it was an acceptable and really rather normal cell count. But you know, you put arguably 4 times the amount of hops as was normal in some of the IPAs back then. You put a grist that's like 25% high protein. This is what you get. This beer's been centrifuged as well, so the cell count will be near to 0. Obviously can't be 0, but it'll be very near to 0. So yeah, double IPA Citra. Yeah.
I think Citra's probably the most synonymous hop with hazy IPAs, right?
Yeah.
It works so well in something where you're maybe dry hopping a little bit early and you got more of that yeast and hop interaction.
Yeah.
It really does come up with some fantastic, you know, it's that kind of classic stone fruit flavour.
Sure,
with
definitely.
the juiciness as well, which is what people want.
Yeah, you know, and it's got like a little edge, or sometimes of kind of allium, slightly savoury note that I think just, you know, gives it a bit of breadth. But yeah, it's a firm favourite of ours in house here for sure. The brief for this sort of beer with us is I want like a 1% sort of pepperiness. We did stray too far on occasion and go into burn, which is like completely bollocks. You know, beer should never. It should, you know, that you should never be proud to make a beer that you can't get to the bottom of the glass and enjoy every single mouthful. Like that's just a fundamental principle. So on occasion, we went a bit too far with the amount of sort of suspended hop particulate in some of our beers. They got a bit hot, spicy, ruined your fucking palate. That's not nice.
And you end up, you know, with this one, it's a pretty dangerous beer. You know, the way that it's constructed is you get a very big hop fruit flavour.
Yep.
And you don't realise that it's actually quite an alcoholic beer as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty dangerous.
I confess to have had easier starts to my day when I avoid this sort of beer. Had some pretty memorable, messy evenings because yeah, you can chug this like you would an IPA or a pale ale. You know, it's again part of our focus here is to make sure that fermentation is really precise. We hate higher alcohols in our beer, so of course you have an alcohol flavour in a beer this strong. But it's dialed in, and again it's kind of wrapped up in this like big mouthfeel, fruitiness, so it doesn't stand out as much as it otherwise would.
In terms of today and the next few years, you know, what do you see as the progression now of Cloudwater from here?
We're always wrestling with whether we should grow or not. We're still a small brewery, produced about just a little under 4,000 hectolitres our first year. We're only just going to get a little bit over 6,000 this year, so we've hardly grown. Our influence and reach have grown immeasurably, but we're still a very, very tiny brewery. And you know, we're faced with a difficult choice to make. Do we hit the gas and make more beer and get more beer out there for the UK and for Europe and maybe even beyond, and try and play our part in progressing beer scenes locally and further afield? Or, you know, do we take a bit less risk and kind of sit back a little bit and allow ourselves to run a brewery that's extremely agile and fast moving. Our decision in the next wee while is to figure out just what path we think we should take. It's a tough one. We've now, I never thought that I would bear responsibility for so many team members, that I would lie awake at night thinking about doing right by them too, and trying to fulfill as many of their hopes and dreams as I possibly can through what we do here. Yeah, always trying to figure out how to deliver, the most to both the team and to all those folk out there that support and love what we do, and also speak up as much as we can on the value of independence. We're not just talking about beer here. I mean, you walk to your local high street, and how many of us are thrilled to see that same national brand on our high street? Not as many of us, I would hazard a guess, as are thrilled to see that local business do well and be responsive to the community. So yeah, I think there's a lot of work ahead of us with that too, for sure.
Well, Paul, I think I've learned a hell of a lot this afternoon. Thanks for letting us share an insight into your amazing brewery, Cloudwater.
Pleasure, man. Yeah, anytime.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Dude. Yeah, anytime.